"Mom, could you run to the kitchen and get the gentleman some more bread?" Those were the exact words my daughter-in-law Brenda said to me. Right in front of the mayor, no less, during a family dinner at the city's finest restaurant. Her voice was just dripping with honey, but everyone at that table knew I was just as much a guest as they were. She wasn't just letting everyone think I was a waitress. She wanted to humiliate me in front of company, and that wasn't even the most painful part. The most painful part was watching my own son, Kevin, nod his head in agreement, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I didn't flinch. I just slowly stood up, smoothed out my dress, and calmly said, "Of course, dear." Brenda gave me this triumphant little smirk. She thought she'd won, that I'd shuffle off to the kitchen in shame, but what nobody at that table knew was that I was the one footing the bill for this entire lavish meal. And I am Diane, a 6-year-old widow from New Orleans. This is the story of the night I walked into the fanciest restaurant in the city as a disrespected mother, and walked out as the owner who burned her son's whole phony world to the ground. If this story touches your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it and follow our channel for more stories that make you think and feel. Your support truly is the wind in our sails and keeps us going. My little world has always smelled of magnolias, and I don't mean from some expensive perfume or a fancy candle. I mean the real, pure scent from the ancient magnolia tree in the small garden behind my apartment in the Garden District. I've lived right here, in this humble little place, for the last 20 years. It's seen my tears when Robert, my beloved husband, passed away suddenly from a heart attack, leaving me alone with our Kevin, who was just 15 at the time. It's also seen the long nights I stayed awake, hunched over accounting books, pinching every last penny from my waitressing jobs to put my son through school, to build a dream that, back then, seemed as far away as the stars over Louisiana. That particular afternoon was like any other. I was out on my balcony, carefully trimming the dead leaves from my hanging fuchsia basket, a patient little chore I've always enjoyed. The New Orleans air was thick and humid, carrying that salty taste from the Gulf and the distant horn of a ship on the Mississippi River. It was a quiet kind of peace, a small satisfaction with the life I'd built for myself. I never needed much: a roof over my head, a garden to tend to, and the memory of Robert warm in my heart. That was all I thought I needed. Then my old-fashioned telephone rang. Its jarring sound shattered the stillness like a stone tossed into a calm pond. I rarely get calls. My circle of friends is small, and they know I'm not one for idle chit-chat. I glanced at the screen, and a name popped up that made my heart skip a beat. Kevin. My son. A whole tangle of feelings welled up in my chest. There was that boundless love a mother has, a love that's just in your bones, that nothing can ever change. But mixed in with it was a lingering sadness, a quiet distance that had been growing between us ever since he married Brenda. I took a deep breath, trying to push down that jumble of emotions, and answered the call. "Hello, Kevin," I said, my voice probably betraying a little of my surprise. "Mom." Kevin's voice came through the line, and right away, I knew something was different. It had this carefully polished warmth to it, a sweetness that I knew didn't come from the heart. It was the voice he used in meetings with his real estate partners, not the voice of the boy I raised. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, son. Is everything all right?" I asked, still holding the little pruning shears in my hand. "Oh, everything's great, Mom," he said, and I could just picture that professional smile plastered on his face. "It's just, Brenda and I were thinking, it's been too long since we all had a real family dinner together. I know we've been so busy with work lately, we feel just terrible about it." I stayed quiet. His words were like a layer of sweet honey poured over a bitter truth. Busy was the word they used to explain away the missed calls, the declined invitations, and the months that went by without them bringing my sweet little granddaughter Emily to visit her grandma. Busy was the invisible wall they'd built between their world and mine. "I know, Mom," Kevin continued, when my silence stretched on, "and I want to make it up to you. Tonight, I want to treat you to a really special dinner. The whole family, my in-laws, will be there too. We're going to Cypress Table. What do you say?" Cypress Table. My heart gave a little ironic pang. It was the crown jewel of my Creole Heart restaurant chain, the brainchild I had poured all my passion, my sweat, and my tears into. It was the most elegant restaurant in the city, a place frequented by politicians, successful business people, and movie stars. Kevin and Brenda loved it there. They often bragged to their friends about their dinners, never knowing that their common mother was the one who created it all. I had never told them the truth. At first I kept it a secret because I didn't want my wealth to affect Kevin's ambition and drive. I wanted him to stand on his own 2 feet. But later, after he got married and swept up into the Harrison family's orbit, I stayed quiet for a different reason. I wanted to see, without my money, who my son truly was. And with each passing day, the answer became more and more painful. But tonight, a little spark of hope ignited in me, faint but stubborn, like a seedling pushing its way through dry, cracked earth. Maybe this was a change. Maybe Kevin had realized how distant we'd become. Maybe he really did want to make it up. A mother's hope is a strange thing. It can be crushed 100 times, but with just one tiny spark, it can flare right back up again. "Of course, son," I heard myself say, my voice softer than I expected. "I'd love that. What time?" "Wonderful," Kevin exclaimed, the relief in his voice all too obvious. 7 o'clock tonight. You can just head straight there. We'll have a table waiting." "All right. I'll see you then." I hung up, and the silence of my apartment enveloped me once more, but this time it was no longer peaceful. It was filled with unspoken questions and a fluttering anticipation. I stood there for a long moment, looking out at my old magnolia tree. Its blossoms were pure white, pristine, giving off that sweet, deep fragrance. Robert had planted that tree for me. He said it was like me, simple on the outside, but strong and full of grace within. I went back inside and walked straight to my closet. It wasn't the wardrobe of a millionaire. It was filled with simple, well-made clothes, good fabrics, classic cuts that stood the test of time. I don't follow trends. I just wear what makes me feel comfortable and confident. But tonight, I wanted to look special. Not to impress the Harrisons. Lord knows I gave up on that a long time ago. It was for Kevin. To show him that his mother, even at 66, was still a woman he could be proud of. My hand slid across the hangers and stopped on a silk dress the color of the sea. It was a deep teal, like the Gulf of Mexico on a calm day. I'd bought it for a very special occasion, my 25th wedding anniversary with Robert, just a few months before he passed. I had only worn it once. The dress had no fussy decorations, no daring cuts. Its elegance came from the soft, flowing silk and the fine stitching that gently draped the body. When I put it on, I felt as if a part of Robert was there with me, giving me strength. I chose a pair of small pearl earrings, the first gift Robert ever gave me. They didn't sparkle like Brenda's diamonds, but they held a whole love story. I wore a pair of low-heeled cream-colored shoes, the only dressy pair I owned that I could walk comfortably in. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 6'6" woman, with lines around her eyes that were proof of a life filled with both laughter and tears, with silver hair that I had no intention of ever dyeing. I wasn't trying to look younger. I just wanted to be myself, a more formal, more hopeful version of myself. As I drove my 5-year-old sedan through the oak-lined streets of the Garden District toward the bustling French Quarter, my mind was a whirlwind. I tried to imagine the conversation tonight. I'd ask about Kevin's work. I'd compliment Brenda's new haircut. I'd tell Emily about the pair of cardinals that had just built a nest in my magnolia tree. I would try. I would really, truly try to break through that wall of ice between us. I remembered Emily's 7th birthday party a few months back. I had spent all afternoon baking a strawberry cream cake from scratch, her absolute favorite. I arrived at the party with a big smile, only to find myself completely out of place among the Harrisons' wealthy friends. Brenda took the cake from me with a polite, tight smile, whisked it away to the kitchen, and it was never seen again. In its place was a gigantic, 3-tiered cake from a famous bakery. I spent the entire party sitting alone in a corner, watching my son schmooze with his father-in-law's business partners, watching my granddaughter get buried under a mountain of expensive gifts. I felt like I was invisible. Would tonight be any different? I wondered. Was this invitation a genuine olive branch, or just another play where I was forced to be an extra? My car pulled up in front of Cypress Table. Warm, golden light spilled from the French windows, and old-fashioned gas lanterns flickered on the wrought iron balconies. The lively sound of a jazz band drifted out, mingling with the cheerful chatter of diners. A quiet sense of pride crept into my heart. This was my empire. Every brick, every tablecloth, every recipe on that menu bore my mark. I had built it from nothing, from a tiny six-table diner into a culinary landmark of New Orleans. I handed my keys to the valet, a young man I'd hired last summer. He bowed his head respectfully. "Good evening, ma'am." He had no idea I was the owner, but I always taught my staff to treat every single customer with the utmost respect. The moment I stepped through the door, the warm, bustling atmosphere of Cypress Table embraced me. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of happy conversations, the soulful wail of a saxophone from the corner, it all blended into a vibrant symphony of indulgence and elegance. I had designed this place to feel both timeless and intimate, with its exposed brick walls, gleaming oak floors, and polished brass chandeliers. Every little detail was a piece of my heart, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a secret little thrill of pride. Maria, the hostess I had personally trained, smiled brightly when she saw me. "Welcome to Cypress Table," she said, her voice professional and warm. "Do you have a reservation this evening?" I was about to answer when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Mom, over here." I turned. Kevin was waving from the best table in the restaurant. It was table 12, tucked away in a private alcove with a view of the courtyard, complete with a fountain and cascading bougainvillea. It was the table VIPs requested months in advance. Robert and I used to dream of sitting at a place like this one day. And now, my son was sitting there, not with me, but with them. The entire Harrison clan was already assembled. Brenda sat beside Kevin, stunning in a fire engine red cocktail dress, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed in an updo that showed off her glittering diamond earrings. Next to her was her mother, Donna Harrison, a meticulously maintained woman with platinum hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Across from them sat Walter Harrison, a large man with a ruddy face and a neatly trimmed mustache, leaning back in his chair with the self-satisfied air of a man accustomed to being served. I smiled and walked toward them. "Hello, children." "Hello, Walter, Donna." Brenda and her mother offered me nothing more than air kisses, their expensive perfumes washing over me like a reminder of the gap between us. Walter just gave a curt nod, his eyes still glued to the wine list. Only Kevin stood up to pull out a chair for me. But then I realized the chair he was pulling out wasn't one of the 4 main chairs around the circular table. It was an extra chair, a simple wooden one that a busboy had hastily added on. It was stuck on the outer edge, practically in the path of the servers. My place. It had been set from the very beginning. I sat down, my silk dress feeling out of place on the plain wooden chair. The 4 of them formed a perfect, impenetrable circle, and I was the odd one out, an awkward addition to their picture-perfect family portrait. "You made good time, Mom," Kevin said, trying to break the awkward silence as he sat back down. "Was traffic bad?" "No, the roads were clear," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. A young waiter, whom I recognized as Thomas, a college student I'd hired part-time, approached the table with leather-bound menus. He smiled at me, a genuine warm smile, completely unaware of the quiet drama unfolding. He started to hand out the menus, but when he got to me, Brenda held up her hand. "Oh, she won't be needing one," she said, her high-pitched voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. She turned to Thomas, her smile sickeningly sweet. "Just a glass of water for her will be fine. My mother-in-law has to watch her health these days, you know. Blood pressure, cholesterol, all those things that come with age." The air around the table seemed to freeze. Thomas blinked, his confusion obvious. He looked at me, then back at Brenda, the menu still in his hand. He was waiting for me to speak up, to protest, to order for myself. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, Kevin cut in, his voice low but firm. "That's right, just water is fine. My mom, she had a little something to eat at home before she came." His lie was a knife straight to my heart. A clumsy, blatant lie told only to please his wife, to avoid a confrontation. He couldn't even look me in the eye as he said it. His gaze darted down to the napkin in his lap, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot flush of shame and anger, but I swallowed it all down. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I looked at Thomas, who was still standing there awkwardly. I managed a small smile, one that probably looked more tired than I intended. "That's right, son. Thank you. Just a glass of water will be perfect." Thomas nodded mechanically and beat a hasty retreat, as if he'd just escaped a dangerous situation. I watched him go, and for the first time tonight, I didn't feel proud of my restaurant. I felt ashamed that one of my employees had to witness this. Silence fell over the table. Walter Harrison cleared his throat and flipped a page in the wine list. Let's go with the Sancerre, the 2019 vintage. I hear it was a very good year. He spoke as if nothing had just happened. Excellent idea, Dad, Brenda chimed in immediately. And for an appetizer, should we get the Royal Creole Seafood Tower? Oysters, shrimp, king crab, the works. Of course, Walter said. What's the point of coming to Cypress Table if you don't get the seafood? They began discussing the menu. Swordfish steak for Walter, lobster thermidor for Donna, pan-seared scallops for Brenda. Kevin, after a moment's hesitation, chose the grilled redfish. They ordered with gusto, the fancy names rolling off their tongues with ease, and the entire time not a single one of them looked at me. No one asked if I'd really eaten, or if I might like even a small salad. I just sat there, with an empty space in front of me, like a ghost at their feast. Thomas returned with a chilled bottle of Sancerre and a single glass of water. He poured the wine into 4 crystal goblets, the pale gold liquid shimmering under the lights. Then he placed the glass of water in front of me, a simple glass tumbler, filled with ice and water. It was clear, cold, and tasteless, just like my position in this family. Walter raised his glass. Well, a toast, he boomed, to health, to success, and to family. To family, Brenda and Donna repeated in unison. Kevin raised his glass too, but his eyes accidentally flickered toward me. For a split second, I saw a flash of guilt in them, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a determination to fit in, to belong to this world. He clinked his glass against his father-in-law's, the sound of crystal ringing out, so cheerful and bright. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and watched them drink. I didn't touch my water. My thirst wasn't something water could quench. It was a thirst for respect, a thirst for acknowledgement. And here, in this magnificent room that I myself had created, I was dying of it. I looked out at the courtyard, where the fountain trickled softly. I remembered the day the architect and I sketched out the design for that space. I wanted it to be an oasis of peace, a place where diners could forget their worries. How ironic that I now felt more worried and insecure than ever, right here in my own oasis. The seafood tower arrived. It was magnificent, a 3-tiered work of art, piled high with crushed ice and the freshest seafood imaginable. Oysters from Apalachicola Bay, plump pink jumbo shrimp, and brilliant red Alaskan king crab legs. The fresh scent of the ocean filled the air around our table. They dug in with relish, the clicking of oyster shells, the clinking of forks, the little murmurs of appreciation. Fantastic, Walter said after slurping down an oyster. Unbelievably fresh. You have to hand it to them. This place knows how to source its seafood. I told you, Dad, Brenda said, taking credit as if she'd caught the oysters herself. This is the only place in New Orleans that gets this kind of quality. I watched them eat. I watched a piece of pristine white crab meat get dipped into a bowl of melted butter. I watched a succulent shrimp disappear between Brenda's perfectly painted red lips. I didn't feel hungry. The humiliation had filled my stomach. I just felt a profound sadness, an emptiness that seemed to have no bottom. This was my son, the baby boy I had once fed with a tiny spoon, the child I had worked myself to the bone for so that he would never know hunger. And here he was, eating king crab while his mother had a glass of water. And he thought that was okay. I wondered, where did I go wrong? Was it because I sacrificed too much, gave so unconditionally that he took my sacrifices for granted? Was it because I had sheltered him too much, tried to protect him from every hardship, so that he never learned how to stand up for what was right, not even for his own mother? The questions swirled in my mind, as sharp and painful as the jagged edges of an oyster shell. I looked at Kevin. He was carefully picking the meat from a crab leg, avoiding my gaze. He was completely lost in his own world, a glittering world where a mother's love was just an inconvenience, something to be hidden away. And in that moment I realized that the fragile little hope I had brought with me tonight had been completely extinguished. This dinner wasn't about mending fences. When the appetizer plates were cleared away, Leaving behind nothing but empty shells and their satisfied appetites, a strange silence fell over the table once more. It wasn't the comfortable silence of loved ones, but a calculated pause, as if they were catching their breath before launching the next attack. I remained still, a silent statue, my glass of water untouched, condensation tracing lines down its side. Pooling on the paper coaster, that little puddle seemed to reflect my own situation, small, quiet, and forgotten. Walter Harrison was the one to break the silence. He leaned back, patting his full stomach, and looked at me with what he probably thought was a kind expression, but I could see the condescension clear as day. "So, Diane," he began, his voice a folksy rumble, "how's work these days? Everything holding up all right?" It was a simple, polite question, but I knew it was a trap. My work, as far as they knew, consisted of odd, nameless jobs in the service industry. They never asked for specifics. They just needed it to be humble enough to reinforce their image of me. "Work is work, Walter," I replied, my voice flat. "There's always something to do." Donna Harrison, Brenda's mother, jumped in immediately. She set her wine glass down gracefully, her diamond bracelet flashing under the chandelier. "Oh, Diane, you're just so admirable, still working so hard at your age. Most of my friends are well into retirement by now, enjoying life, traveling the world." She paused for a beat, letting her words hang in the air. "I was just talking to Margaret the other day. She just got back from a cruise in Norway. She said the fjords were just breathtaking. It's such a shame that not everyone gets the chance to see the world, isn't it?" Her words were a near-perfect echo of what Brenda had said earlier, as if mother and daughter had rehearsed this little script. Every word was wrapped in the velvet of fake sympathy, but inside was a sharp blade, cutting into my reality. They were painting a picture of me, an old, poor woman, trapped in a life of manual labor, while the wide world out there was a party to which I'd never be invited. I didn't answer. I just gave a slight nod, a gesture that could be taken as agreement, or simply an acknowledgement that I'd heard her. My silence seemed to egg them on. "Actually," Walter picked up where his wife left off, "we have been a little worried about you, Diane. Financially, I mean. The stock market has been all over the place. I just had to restructure my own portfolio. Do you have a good 401 co, or something similar? Planning for the future is just so critical." "Oh, Dad, you don't need to worry," Brenda interjected, her tone suggesting she was defending me, but her words only pushed me down further. "Diane is very frugal. It's a wonderful quality to have, especially when one doesn't have many options." "Doesn't have many options," the phrase hung in the air, thick with contempt. It erased the years I'd worked to exhaustion, the nights I'd stayed up calculating investments, the risky but wise decisions that had allowed me to build an empire. In their eyes, I was just a failure, someone who didn't know how to plan, a walking lesson in what happens when you aren't as fortunate as they were. The main courses arrived. The aroma of grilled redfish, baked lobster, and garlic butter filled the air. Thomas placed the pristine white plates before the four of them. He avoided looking at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. I felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. He was just doing his job, but he'd been dragged into an ugly family drama. As they began to eat, the verbal assault continued. This time, the target shifted to my son. "Kevin," Walter said after a sip of wine, "how is that project in the warehouse district coming along? I heard there were some issues with the zoning permits." Kevin immediately sat up straighter, putting down his fork. "Yes, sir, everything's under control. I'm working with the city councilman's office. We should have a solution soon." "Good," Walter nodded. "But you need to be faster. In this business, speed is everything, and connections. Did you know that Brenda's cousin David plays golf with that councilman every weekend? Do you need me to make a call?" "Well, if you wouldn't mind, sir, that would be a great help," Kevin said, his voice full of gratitude. I sat there and listened, and a bitter truth became crystal clear. My son, the boy I had taught to be self-reliant, to be proud of his own accomplishments, was now dependent on his wife's family connections to get ahead. His career wasn't built on merit, but on favors and handshakes in exclusive country clubs, and the price he paid for it was his own dignity and his mother's. Brenda, as if to hammer the point home, turned to me. "See, Mom? This is what family is for, supporting each other. Dad always knows how to get things done. It's the advantage of having the right connections." The right connections. I repeated the words silently in my head, and I, clearly, was the wrong one. A connection to be hidden, or at least kept at a safe distance. Donna Harrison spoke up again, changing the subject but not the target. Brenda, dear, I saw the picture you posted on Instagram the other day of you taking Emily for her riding lesson. She looked like such a little lady in her riding gear. Oh, she just loves it, Mom, Brenda said, her eyes lighting up. Her instructor says she's a natural. We're actually thinking of signing her up for a very prestigious equestrian camp in Virginia next summer. Virginia? That's a bit of a trip, isn't it? Donna commented. It is, but it's worth it, Brenda replied. We want her to socialize with the right kind of children, to learn those refined skills. You know, environment is so important. Common habits can have such a negative influence on a child's development, especially at this impressionable age. She said it while flicking a quick glance in my direction. It lasted only a second, but its message was as clear as day. I was the common habit. Our afternoons spent gardening together, getting our hands dirty. The chocolate chip cookies I baked from scratch, instead of expensive macarons. The fairy tales I told her, instead of lessons on which fork to use. My love, in their eyes, was common and harmful. A cold anger began to creep into my veins. They weren't just insulting me, they were trying to take away the most precious thing I had, my right to be a grandmother. They wanted to turn my granddaughter into a carbon copy of them, a little doll who only knew designer labels and social etiquette, and erase every trace of me from her life. Kevin sat there, silent. He ate his red fish, carefully flaking the meat from the bones, as if it were the most important job in the world. He heard all of it. He heard his wife and his mother-in-law belittle his mother, criticize her way of life, and planned to push her away from the granddaughter he knew I loved more than life itself. And he said nothing. Not a word of protest, not even a frown. His silence was his consent. His silence was more painful than 1,000 insults. I looked out the window at the courtyard, bathed in soft golden light. I saw a young couple at a nearby table, holding hands and laughing. They looked so happy. I wondered if my son would ever realize what he had lost. He had traded unconditional love, the warmth of a real family, for a place in a phony world built on transactional relationships and cold smiles. The anger inside me slowly subsided, replaced by a chilling calm. The pain was still there, but it no longer burned. It crystallized, becoming a cold, sharp diamond in my chest. I was no longer a victim being tortured. I was an observer. I watched them like a scientist studying a strange species. I noted every word, every gesture, every look. I analyzed their poorly disguised cruelty, my son's cowardice, and the hollowness behind their glittering facade. The dinner continued. They talked about charity auctions they attended, 5-star resorts they were visiting, celebrities they'd run into. Their world was a grand stage, and they were the lead actors, always trying to play their parts perfectly. And I, sitting in the extra chair with my untouched glass of water, finally understood my role in their play. I was the backdrop. A shabby, faded backdrop used to make their own brilliance shine brighter. As the main course plates were more than half empty, their conversation lulled, giving way to the quiet sounds of silverware and appreciative sips of wine. I thought perhaps that the worst of the emotional torture was over. I was wrong. The cruelest act of the play was yet to come, and this time it would have a spotlight and an audience. Mayor Thompson, the distinguished politician who had passed our table earlier, was on his way out of the restaurant. He was with a few other important-looking guests, likely after a business dinner. As he passed our table again, he paused, a polite smile on his face, as he acknowledged the Harrison family. "A wonderful evening, isn't it, Walter?" he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "This restaurant truly never disappoints." "Indeed, Mr. Mayor," Walter said, quickly getting to his feet to shake the mayor's hand with reverence. "We're just having a lovely, cozy family dinner." Brenda seized the opportunity. She stood up, smoothing her red dress, and beamed. "It's such an honor to see you here, sir. My husband, Kevin, is a great admirer of the work you're doing for our city." "Thank you, miss." The mayor nodded, his gaze sweeping across the table. And then his eyes landed on me. A small frown creased his brow, a flicker of confusion on his face. He remembered me. He remembered the woman he had mistaken for a server. "Ah," he said, probably trying to find a polite way to address the situation. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Instead of correcting the misunderstanding, instead of introducing me properly, Brenda did the unthinkable. She turned to me, the smile never leaving her face, but her eyes were cold and cruel. "Mom," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "the mayor asked you for some bread earlier. You must have forgotten. Could you run to the kitchen and get the gentleman some more bread?" My world just stopped. This wasn't a subtle jab anymore. It was an order, a public naked humiliation. She wasn't just allowing the misunderstanding to continue, she was cementing it, turning me into an actual servant right in front of a powerful man. She was trying to hammer the final nail into the coffin of my dignity. The air grew thick. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Mayor Thompson looked surprised and a little uncomfortable. Walter and Donna Harrison, on the other hand, looked amused, as if they were watching a good show, and Kevin, my son, he stood there, frozen to the spot. The color drained from his face, a terrible conflict warring in his eyes. He knew this was wrong. Some part of him knew this was a line that should never be crossed, but he did nothing. He just stood there, his cowardice strangling any words of protest in his throat. All I felt in that moment was a strange, hollow emptiness. The anger, the pain, the shame, it all seemed to fall away, replaced by a cold clarity. I looked straight at Brenda. For the first time all night, I truly saw her, not as my daughter-in-law, but as a stranger. I saw a woman consumed by her own insecurities, someone who had to push others down to feel tall. And I felt a wave of pity for her. I slowly placed my hands on the table, a deliberate, measured movement. I glanced at each face. I saw the smug satisfaction in my in-laws' eyes. I saw the cowardice in my son's. I saw the confusion in the mayor's. And then I stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at Brenda. I simply rose to my feet, my wooden chair scraping softly against the floor. I smoothed the front of my silk dress, a small, dignified gesture. A hush fell over our corner of the restaurant. Everyone was waiting to see what I would do. Would I cry? Would I scream? Or would I meekly walk to the kitchen like a real servant? I turned, but I didn't walk toward the kitchen. I walked in the opposite direction, toward the main exit. Every step was steady and sure. I wasn't running away. I was simply leaving. Leaving this ridiculous play. Leaving these people who had tried to strip me of everything. "Mom," I heard Kevin call after me, his voice weak and desperate. But I didn't turn back. I kept walking, past the elegant tables, past the laughing couples and celebrating families. I could feel curious eyes following me, but I didn't care. In that moment, it was just me and the ironclad resolve that had just formed in my soul. I had given them too many chances. I had endured more than enough. My silence, my patience, they had mistaken it for weakness. Tonight, they were going to learn a lesson about confusing kindness with frailty, a lesson about never, ever underestimating a New Orleans woman who has weathered her own storms. I was almost at the door. Freedom was just a few feet away. I could feel the cool night air waiting for me outside. I was going to get out of here, go back to my quiet apartment, back to Robert's magnolia tree, and I would never look back. But then, it seemed fate had other plans. Just as my hand was about to touch the brass door handle, a small but powerful whoomph erupted from the back of the restaurant. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make everyone jump. It was followed almost instantly by the thick, acrid smell of burning grease and a shrill scream from someone in the kitchen. And then, like a thunderclap, the restaurant's fire alarm system began to shriek, a frantic, piercing wail. The magnificent chandeliers flickered and died, replaced by the flashing red strobes of the emergency lights, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the faces that were now beginning to panic. The symphony of elegance was over. The storm had just arrived. For a moment, the entire restaurant was pure chaos. Screams, the crash of toppling chairs, people shouting for their loved ones. A stampede began toward the main door, people shoving and pushing. I froze in the doorway. My first instinct was to keep going, to get out, but then another, stronger instinct took hold and rooted me to the spot. This is my restaurant. These are my employees. These are my guests, who entrusted me with their safety. I turned around and faced the chaos, and in the flashing red light, I was no longer Diane. The humiliated mother. I was Diane Evans, the owner, the captain who could not abandon her ship in a storm. The fear vanished. My personal pain became small and insignificant. There was only one goal now: get everyone out of here safely. I looked toward table 12. Through the panicked crowd, I saw Kevin, Brenda, and her parents, still standing there, their faces white with terror, completely helpless. My son, the man who always wanted to appear so strong and successful, now looked like a lost little boy. The chaos was like a monster that had just been woken up. It roared through the screams, the sound of breaking glass, and the frantic pounding of everyone's hearts. The red emergency light swept across the room, turning elegant faces into distorted masks of fear. The smell of smoke grew thicker, a bitter smell of burning oil and something plastic melting. It was the smell of imminent danger. The crowd was a frantic mob. People pushed and shoved, trying to funnel toward the main door where I stood. A woman in a sparkling evening gown tripped and fell, her cry of terror lost in the cacophony. A man in a suit tried to climb over an overturned table. All logic and courtesy had evaporated, leaving only the raw, primal instinct to survive. I took in the scene for only a split second, but my mind was working a mile a minute. I had spent hundreds of hours training my staff for this exact kind of situation. We had quarterly fire drills, with scenarios ranging from small kitchen flare-ups to a gas system failure. I knew every emergency exit, the location of every fire extinguisher, and the evacuation protocol by heart. That knowledge wasn't just theory on paper anymore. It was screaming in my head, demanding action. And while everyone else was panicking, I found a strange, profound calm. My personal pain, the humiliation I had suffered, it was all pushed aside. There were lives at stake now. The business I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into was in danger, and I was not going to stand by and watch it all go up in smoke. I took a deep breath, the smoke-filled air stinging my lungs. I turned back around, not to flee, but to face the storm. I walked back into the fray, against the tide of pushing bodies, my small frame steady and determined. "Stop!" My voice rang out, not a scream, but a command. It was sharp, powerful, and full of authority. It was the voice of someone forged by years of having to make her own decisions, the voice of someone who was used to being in charge. For a moment, my shout cut through the chaos. A few people near me stopped in their tracks, looking with surprise at the older woman in the sea-green silk dress who was ordering them around. "Listen to me!" I shouted again, my voice carrying across the room, even over the shrieking alarm. "Panicking won't help anyone. Listen to me." I pointed toward the jazz band, where the musicians were huddled together in fear. "You men, block the main door. Don't let anyone else crush their way out of there. People will get trampled. Direct them to the right." Then I turned to my waitstaff, their young faces pale with fear. "Maria, Thomas, lead everyone to the emergency exit in the courtyard. Now, that way is safer." My orders were clear, precise, and given without a hint of hesitation. In a crisis, people crave a leader, and in that moment, I was their leader. Maria, my hostess, was the first to react. The panic in her eyes was replaced by focus. She gave a sharp nod. "Yes, ma'am." "Thomas, get the emergency flashlights from behind the bar. Light the way." "Yes, ma'am." My staff sprang into action. They moved with a trained, organized purpose, like soldiers. They began directing the crowd, their own voices now calmer and more assertive. The chaos began to subside, replaced by an urgent, orderly evacuation. I didn't stop there. I knew where the source of the problem was: the kitchen. I started moving quickly toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, from which black smoke was now billowing. People parted to let me through. As I passed table 12, I glanced at my family. They were still standing there, frozen like statues. Brenda was clutching Kevin's arm, her beautiful face now streaked with mascara, laced tears. Walter and Donna Harrison were huddled together, their usual arrogance gone, replaced by naked fear. And Kevin, my son, was staring at me. His eyes held a look of utter, profound disbelief. He was watching his mother, the woman he and his in-laws had just treated like a servant, command an entire restaurant, saving dozens of lives with an authority he had never seen before. He was seeing a completely different person, a person he never knew existed. Our eyes met for only a second, But in that second, I saw his entire world turning upside down. The wall he had built between us, the wall made of cowardice and prejudice, was beginning to crack. I didn't have time for him. I turned away and shoved open the kitchen doors. The scene inside was worse than I'd imagined. A deep fryer had gone up in flames, and the fire had already spread to the overhead ventilation system, licking at the ceiling tiles. A young line cook, a new hire I remembered from last week, was standing frozen in a corner, white as a sheet. He had made the fatal mistake of throwing water on a grease fire, which only made it explode. Miguel, my head chef, a large, steady man from Mexico, was trying to use the CO2 extinguisher, but the flames were already too big. "Miguel!" I yelled over the roar of the fire. "The Class K extinguisher, in the corner. It's a grease fire, you need the K-class." Miguel turned, saw me, and his eyes lit up with relief. "Ma'am, thank God." He didn't question why I was there, he just trusted my command. He dropped the CO2 extinguisher and scrambled to the corner where the specialized wet chemical extinguisher was mounted. I turned to the terrified young cook. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice stern but calm. Leo," he stammered. "Leo, listen to me," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I need you to go out there and shut off the main power breaker for the entire kitchen. It's the red box, right next to the walk-in cooler door. Can you do that?" He nodded frantically, the clear instructions seeming to snap him out of his panic. He ran off to do it. I turned back to the fire. It was dancing angrily, consuming everything in its path. I could feel the intense heat on my face, but I wasn't afraid. I'd faced too many fires in my life. This was just one more. Miguel returned with the K-class extinguisher. "Ready, ma'am." "Aim at the base of the fire, Miguel," I directed. "Create a foam blanket, cut off the oxygen." Miguel pulled the pin and squeezed the handle. A stream of white chemical foam shot out, smothering the burning fryer. The fire roared one last time in protest, and then, slowly, it began to die. The thick white foam was suffocating it. Just then, Leo returned. "The breaker is off, ma'am." "Good boy," I said. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the dying glow of the fire and the red emergency lights bleeding in from the dining room. The smell of smoke and chemicals was overpowering. We had it under control. From a distance, I could hear the approaching sirens of the fire trucks getting closer and closer. I leaned against a cold, stainless steel table, feeling my legs tremble for the first time. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me feeling exhausted. Miguel came to my side, his face smudged with soot. "You saved us all, ma'am. If you hadn't been here, I don't know." "We all saved it, Miguel," I corrected him. "This is why we practice." I looked around my kitchen. It was a mess. Black soot clung to the walls, and the floor was covered in foam and water. But it was still standing. The bones were good. It could be fixed. It could be rebuilt. Just like me. I took a deep, ragged breath. I had put out the fire in the kitchen, but I knew the real fire. The fire of truth and confrontation had just been ignited out in that dining room, and I was ready to face it. When Miguel and I walked out of the kitchen, the main dining room looked like a battlefield. A few tables were overturned, shattered glass glittered on the floor in the emergency lighting, and a white tablecloth was crumpled and smeared with shoe prints. The air still smelled of smoke, but the frantic panic had been replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Most of the guests had been safely evacuated to the courtyard or the front of the restaurant. Only a few groups remained, including Mayor Thompson's party and, of course, my family. They stood there, amid the wreckage, like unwilling audience members at a play that had just come to a shocking halt. Firefighters in their heavy gear and oxygen masks burst through the main doors. The captain, a tall man with a seasoned face, strode directly toward Miguel and me. "I'm Captain Miller. Who's in charge here?" he asked, his voice loud and clear. Before Miguel could answer, I took a step forward. My face was probably smudged with soot, and my beautiful silk dress was now stained with smoke and chemical residue, but I stood up straight. "I am," I said, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Diane Evans. I'm the owner of this restaurant. The fire started in a deep fryer in the kitchen. We've extinguished it with a K-class fire extinguisher and have shut off all power. All guests and staff have been evacuated. There are no injuries." I delivered the report concisely and professionally, just as I'd been trained. Captain Miller looked me up and down, a flicker of surprise in his eyes at my appearance, but it was quickly replaced by the professional respect of one competent person for another. "Excellent work, Mrs. Evans," he said. "My team is going in to make sure everything is secure. You acted incredibly quickly and correctly." He motioned for his team to head toward the kitchen. As they passed, I noticed that every remaining eye in the room was fixed on me. The silence was now heavy, not with fear, but with utter astonishment. They had heard, Mayor Thompson had heard, Walter and Donna Harrison had heard, Brenda had heard, and Kevin, my son, had definitely heard. The owner. That one word hung in the air, glittering ironically under the red lights. It completely shattered the image of the common, optionless-as-old woman they had so carefully constructed all evening. It ripped away the curtain of their lies and exposed an undeniable truth. I turned and looked directly at my family. Brenda was the first one I saw. Her beautiful face was now a grotesque mixture of horror, confusion, and a dawning, sickening shame. Her red-lipped mouth was hanging open as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. "You're the owner?" she finally stammered, the words sounding foreign and strange on her tongue. Walter and Donna Harrison looked as if they'd been struck by lightning. Their smug, condescending airs had vanished completely. They were staring at me, the woman they had just treated like a beggar, with undisguised shock. They weren't just shocked, they were recalculating. Their entire value system, which placed money and status above all else, was being turned on its head. The poor mother-in-law they despised was actually a successful businesswoman, the owner of one of their favorite symbols of class. The irony was too much for their practical minds to handle. And then I looked at Kevin, my son. He stood there, motionless, his face as pale as paper. He wasn't looking at me with shock. It was something far more complex. It was devastation. He looked like someone who had just realized the foundation of the house he was living in was made of sand. Everything he believed, every choice he had made, every bit of dignity he had sacrificed to please his in-laws, it all became meaningless and ridiculous in that single moment. He had turned his back on his mother, whom he saw as a burden, only to discover that the burden was more powerful and respectable than all the people he was trying so desperately to impress. The shame washed over him, and it was written all over his face, a deep, bitter, unconcealable shame. Now that the truth was out, now that everyone's roles had been stripped away, the next act of the play began, the act of phony remorse. "Mom," Kevin stammered, taking a step toward me. Why didn't you ever tell me?" His voice trembled, not with fear of the fire, but with fear of the truth. He was looking for a reason, an excuse, a way to blame me to lessen his own cowardice. I looked him straight in the eye. "What would have been the point, Kevin?" I asked, my voice holding no accusation, only a profound weariness. "So you would treat me better? So you would have ordered me a salad instead of a glass of water? A son's love shouldn't come with a price tag, Kevin." My words hit him like a slap. He recoiled, his face contorting in pain. Brenda, at this point, seemed to have regained some of her composure. Her instinct for self-preservation was stronger than her shame. She rushed to Kevin's side, took his arm, and turned to me with a brittle, forced smile. "Mom, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding," she said, her voice shifting back to that familiar sweet tone. We were just worried about your health." We really were. Her blatant lie sounded absurd in the smoke-filled room. Not even a child would have believed that excuse. I didn't bother to answer her. I just looked at her, and my silence was more powerful than any accusation. Just then, Mayor Thompson, who had witnessed everything from start to finish, approached us. His face was no longer polite and social. It was serious, with a hint of disappointment. He walked right up to me. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice full of genuine respect, "I want to sincerely apologize for my confusion earlier, and I have to say, this city owes you a debt of gratitude. The way you handled this situation was nothing short of extraordinary. You saved a lot of people from being hurt, or worse. You are a true hero." "I just did what had to be done, Mr. Mayor," I replied humbly. "No, you did more than that," he insisted. "You showed incredible character." He held out his hand. I looked down at my own sooty hand, then reached out and shook his. It was a firm, meaningful handshake. And that's when Brenda made her move. Seeing an opportunity to connect with a powerful figure, a way to salvage her own image, she did something even more shameless. She quickly dropped Kevin's arm, rushed to my side, and linked her arm through mine as if we were the closest mother and daughter in the world. "Oh, Mr. Mayor, my mother-in-law is just always this amazing," she chirped, her voice falsely bright. "She's an inspiration to our whole family. And this is my husband, Kevin. He so admires your urban development policies. Perhaps one day..." But she didn't get to finish. Mayor Thompson gently but firmly disengaged her arm from mine. He took a step back and looked directly at Brenda and Kevin. The smile was completely gone from his face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as cold as ice, "I was standing right here. I saw how you both treated this amazing mother 20 minutes ago. I heard everything." He paused, letting his words sink in. "A person's character isn't shown in how they flatter me to my face, son," he said, looking straight at Kevin. "It's shown in how they treat their own family when they think no one important is watching. A man who can't defend his own mother's honor can never be a trusted leader." Then he turned to Brenda. "And a woman who has to humiliate others to lift herself up will never earn true respect." He shook his head in disappointment. "Good luck with your careers. You're going to need it." With that, he turned his back on them completely. He turned only to me, giving me one last, respectful nod. "Have a good evening, Mrs. Evans. And thank you again." Then he left, leaving behind a dead, chilling silence. The judgment had been passed, not by me, but by the very world they so desperately wanted to belong to. They had been exposed and rejected, not for being poor, but for having poor character. Kevin and Brenda stood there, amid the ruins of my restaurant and their reputation. They looked small, pathetic, and utterly lost. The blow they had just received was far more devastating than any fire. After Mayor Thompson left, leaving behind that cold space and his hanging judgment, the room seemed to get even quieter. The fire department finished their checks quickly. Captain Miller came and told me the fire was completely out and there was no risk of it starting again. He left a couple of his men behind to keep an eye on things and then departed, leaving us in the quiet aftermath of the disaster. My staff, though still shaken, had already started a preliminary cleanup under Miguel's direction. Maria was outside, reassuring the last of the guests and arranging rides for them if they needed. Their professionalism, even in a crisis like this, made me proud all over again. In the midst of all this activity, my family remained frozen at table 12, like an isolated island in the slow-moving current of recovery. They didn't know what to do or say. The mayor's words had stripped them of all their weapons, all their excuses. They just stood there, exposed under the emergency lights. Finally, it was Walter Harrison, the man so used to being in control, who made the first move. But it wasn't an apology, it was a retreat. We should go," he said, his voice hoarse, unable to look at me. "There's nothing more to do here." "Yes, let's go home," Donna Harrison whispered in agreement, hastily grabbing her designer handbag. Brenda and Kevin seemed to wake from their trance. Leaving, that was the only solution. Flee the scene of their humiliation, flee from my sight. Kevin looked around awkwardly, as if searching for a waiter. Let me settle the bill," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The check." He was trying to cling to one last piece of normalcy, one final act that might give him the illusion of control, paying for the meal. That's what a responsible man would do. I looked at him, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. He looked so pathetic, trying to solve a problem with money that could never be bought. I signaled to Thomas, who was standing nearby. The young student approached, his face still worried but calmer now. "Thomas," I said, my voice soft but clear, "this table, there will be no check tonight." Thomas looked at me, then over at my family. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He turned to Kevin, who was staring at me in confusion. "Sir," Thomas said, his young voice taking on a formal, almost ironic gravity, "there will be no bill for your table this evening. Our owner says your meal is complimentary." Complimentary? The word echoed in the silence. It wasn't an act of forgiveness. It was a slap in the face, a final, stinging, invisible blow. It meant, "You are not my customers. You are uninvited guests who have caused a great deal of trouble." It meant, "The very meal you used to humiliate me was a gift from me. You feasted on my kindness, and then you weaponized it against me. It meant, your debt to me can never be paid with money." Walter Harrison's face went from red to purple. He, a man who prided himself on being able to afford anything, was now being put in the position of a charity case. It was the ultimate insult to his pride. Brenda looked like she was about to cry. Complimentary meant she had no power here. She couldn't complain. She couldn't make demands. She was just an outsider who had been allowed to sit for a while and was now being politely, but contemptuously, dismissed. Kevin just stood there, his head bowed. I could see his shoulders shaking. He understood. More than anyone, he understood the bitter meaning behind my gesture. I hadn't yelled at him. I hadn't cursed him. I had used my own kindness, my own generosity, to show him just how small he had become. We can't." Walter started to protest, but then he fell silent. What could he say? Thank you? Insist on paying? Both options would only make him look more pathetic. There was nothing left to say. They silently turned, a broken family, and started to walk out of the restaurant. They walked past the messy tables, past my employees who were beginning their work. No one looked at them, no one said a word to them. Their presence had been erased from this place. As they passed me, Kevin paused for a moment. He looked up, and I could see tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. I'm so sorry." I looked into his eyes. I saw the regret there, but I also saw the weakness that had led him down this path. His apology, as sincere as it might have been in that moment, was too little, too late. It was like an arsonist saying sorry after burning the house down, just because he didn't expect the fire to spread so fast. "Go home, Kevin," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Brenda is waiting for you." It was a dismissal. I didn't say I forgive you. I didn't say we'll talk later. I put him back in the place he had chosen, with his wife in her family. He stood there for another second, hoping. But when he saw the unshakable resolve in my eyes, he turned and shuffled after the Harrisons, disappearing into the New Orleans night. I was left standing alone in my ruined restaurant. The smell of smoke lingered, but I felt like I could breathe again. A huge weight, a burden I had carried on my shoulders for years, felt like it had finally been lifted. Miguel came to my side and handed me a bottle of water. "You should sit down and rest for a minute, ma'am." I nodded, took the bottle, and sat down on a chair that was still upright. I twisted off the cap and took a long drink. The cool water soothed my dry throat. I hadn't eaten a thing all night, but for the first time in a long, long time, I no longer felt hungry. I felt full of truth, full of my reclaimed dignity. I looked around my restaurant. It was damaged. It would take time, money, and effort to fix everything. But I knew it would be back, more beautiful and stronger than before, because its foundation was solid. Unlike some families, the weeks that followed were filled with a heavy silence. Not one phone call from Kevin, not one text message, no further apologies. It was as if his family had simply vanished from my life. Or maybe they were hoping that if they stayed quiet long enough, the storm they created would just blow over and things would go back to the way they were. They didn't understand. That storm wasn't a passing event. It was a permanent change in the landscape of my soul. I didn't wallow in that silence. On the contrary, I found myself filled with a surprising amount of energy. The fire at Cypress Table became my project. I worked with contractors, interior designers, and insurance adjusters. I decided not just to repair the restaurant, but to reinvent it, making it even more beautiful and safer than before. The work consumed me, and in that busyness, I found a sense of peace. I no longer agonized over whether Kevin would call. I no longer hoped for some fantasy reconciliation. I had accepted the truth. And once I accepted it, I knew I had to act. The silence couldn't last forever. There were tangible ties that needed to be definitively cut. One Tuesday morning, about a month after that fateful night, I sat in the office of my lawyer, Mr. Dubois, a trusted man who had handled my legal affairs for nearly 15 years. On the polished mahogany desk between us were 2 documents. "Are you sure about this, Diane?" Mr. Dubois asked, his voice tinged with concern. "These are irreversible decisions." I looked out the window at the old oak trees lining Street Charles Avenue. "I've never been more sure of anything, Mr. Dubois," I said, my voice steady. "Some things, once they're broken, can't be pieced back together. Trying to do so only causes more pain for everyone involved." Mr. Dubois nodded, understanding he couldn't change my mind. He pushed the 2 files toward me. The first letter, I had read it over and over. It was a formal, coldly professional letter demanding that Kevin and Brenda repay the $200,000. It was mine and Robert's life savings, money I had given them without a second thought 5 years ago for the down payment on their lavish home in the uptown neighborhood. At the time, I thought I was investing in my son's future happiness. Now, I realized I had only been financing a lifestyle that pulled him further away from me. It wasn't a gift. It was a loan for a false happiness, and it was time to call it in. The second letter was even more decisive. It announced the dissolution of a $500,000 trust fund I had quietly established for my granddaughter, Emily. My heart ached when I thought of her. She was the innocent victim in all of this. But I could not let that money, my legacy, fall into the hands of people who would use it to teach her to become a carbon copy of themselves. I could not let my legacy be used to create another generation that devalued love and dignity. Under the new terms, the entire sum would be transferred to a charitable foundation I had just created, the Magnolia Fund, dedicated to providing scholarships and startup capital for single mothers in New Orleans. My legacy would go to women like I once was, women fighting to build a better future for their children. I signed both documents. The dark blue ink on the crisp white paper felt like an oath. It was done. 2 days later, just as I expected, Kevin appeared on my doorstep. I was in my kitchen, kneading dough for bread. The smell of yeast and flour always calmed me. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't surprised. I calmly wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door. He stood on the porch. He looked thinner and more haggard than I remembered. His expensive business suit seemed to hang off him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. In his hand, he clutched the 2 letters from my lawyer. "Mom," he said, his voice raw. "What? What is this?" I didn't invite him in. I just stood in the doorway, my body forming an invisible barrier. "It's exactly what it says it is, Kevin," I replied evenly. "But why?" he asked, disbelief and anger starting to bubble up in his voice. "Why would you do this to us? To Emily? What did she ever do to you?" "Emily did nothing," I said, "and that's precisely why I'm doing this. I will not have my legacy used to teach her that a person's worth is measured by the money in their bank account or the exclusive clubs they belong to. I will not let her grow up to be her mother." "Brenda's not like that," Kevin protested weakly. I looked him straight in the eye. "Isn't she? Then who was the woman who told her mother-in-law to go fetch bread in front of the mayor? Who was the woman who said a grandmother's love was a harmful common habit?" Kevin fell silent. He couldn't deny the truth. "And the money for the house," I continued, my voice still steady but now heavy with weight. "That was your father's and my blood, sweat, and tears. I gave it to my son." But the man standing in front of me now, the man who let his own mother be humiliated, the man who chose his wife's wealth over his family's honor, that man is not my son anymore. "Mom!" he cried out, his voice cracking. "You can't say that! I'm your son!" "My son," I said, and every word was a painful truth I had forced myself to accept, would never have let his mother sit there with a glass of water while the rest of the family ate king crab. He would never have lied to cover his own cowardice. He would never have sold his mother's dignity for a compliment from his father-in-law. I took a deep breath. "The son I raised. I think he died that night in the restaurant, Kevin. I don't know who you are, but you're not him." Tears began to stream down his face. He wasn't trying to argue anymore. He just stood there, broken. So what am I supposed to do now?" he asked, like a lost child. "You're going to do what a grown man does," I said. "You're going to take responsibility for your choices. You and Brenda will have to figure out how to pay back that money. Maybe you'll have to sell that big house. Maybe you'll have to learn to live a less extravagant life. Perhaps that will be a good lesson for both of you." I looked at him one last time. The mother's love was still there, a dull ache that would never go away, but it was covered by a layer of icy resolve. I had cried enough. I had sacrificed enough. "My legacy will not be given to a stranger," I said, repeating the words I had told myself. "Now you should go." I began to slowly close the door. "Mom, don't!" he pleaded, reaching out a hand as if to stop it. But I didn't hesitate. I shut the door firmly. The click of the lock sounded final and absolute. It wasn't just the sound of a wooden door closing. It was the sound of a chapter of my life closing. I leaned my back against the door, listening to his fading, desperate footsteps on the walkway. I didn't cry. I felt a strange peace, an immense relief, as if a giant boulder had just been lifted from my soul. I went back to my kitchen. The dough was still waiting. I sprinkled a little more flour on the counter and began to knead again. Under my hands, the dough became smooth, elastic, and full of life. A few months later, Cypress Table reopened, more magnificent than ever. My Magnolia Fund awarded its first scholarships to 3 incredible young women, determined single mothers studying business administration. I hired one of them as an intern at my restaurant. She had bright eyes and an eagerness to learn that reminded me of myself all those years ago. One afternoon, as she and I were going over the new menu in my office, she looked at me and said, "Mrs. Evans, you're my biggest inspiration. I hope one day my son will be as proud of me as I am of you." I smiled, a real, heartfelt smile. I looked out the window at the old magnolia tree, which was covered in white blossoms. "You know, honey," I said to her, "the important thing isn't whether our children are proud of us. The important thing is that, in the end, we learn to be proud of ourselves." And in that moment, in the soft golden sunlight of New Orleans, I didn't just feel proud. I felt free, completely and utterly free. 1 year, 12 months, 365 days had passed since that fateful night. A year since I had closed the door on my son, an act that was both liberating and soul-crushingly painful. They say time heals all wounds. I've learned they're wrong. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to live with the scars. My life had changed profoundly. Cypress Table was reborn from the ashes, more beautiful and safer than ever. I'd installed a state-of-the-art fire suppression system, and the new kitchen was a chef's dream. The restaurant was doing better than ever, its reputation burnished by the tale of its heroic owner. Sometimes I'd read articles about myself and feel like they were writing about a stranger. But the biggest change wasn't in my business, it was in my spirit. The weight I had carried for so many years, the burden of pleasing, of sacrificing, of biting my tongue was truly gone. I woke up each morning with a sense of lightness. I made time for myself. I joined a pottery class, something I'd wanted to do for ages. My fingers, so used to kneading dough and handling knives, were now learning to coax clay into new shapes, creating form out of chaos. It felt like a metaphor for my life. My Magnolia Fund became my new passion, my living legacy. I didn't just write checks to single mothers, I gave them my time, my expertise. I sat with them, listened to their stories, helped them with business plans, and sometimes, I just watched their kids for a few hours so they could go on a job interview. Sarah, my first intern, was now an assistant manager at one of my other restaurants. Seeing her confidence and success brought me a joy greater than any profit margin. I had built a new family, one not of blood, but of mutual support, respect, and shared dreams. I had daughters and grandchildren I never knew I was missing. And my old family? They had become ghosts. I didn't seek out news of them, but in a small city like New Orleans, whispers and fragments of information find their way to you. I heard the Harrisons had to sell their vacation home in Florida. Maybe the real estate market was tough, or maybe their empire wasn't as solid as they pretended. I heard Brenda was no longer a fixture at the high-profile charity events. Mayor Thompson's words that night, though few, carried the weight of a social death sentence. The world she tried so hard to conquer had turned its back on her. And Kevin. Every so often I'd see his real estate company's name in the business section. His projects didn't seem to be going as smoothly anymore. Without the Harrison connections to grease the wheels, he was struggling to make it on his own in a cutthroat world. I felt no satisfaction, just a hollow sadness. This is what I'd wanted, wasn't it? For him to stand on his own 2 feet, but I never wanted those feet to have to walk such a rocky road. Our separation was absolute. Not a single call, not a single letter. It was as if his 38 years of life had been erased from my memory and mine from his. But there was one invisible thread I could never manage to cut. Emily, my granddaughter. She was 8 now. Sometimes, scrolling through social media, I'd accidentally see a photo of her on a mutual friends page. She was getting so big. Her curly dark hair was longer, and she was missing her 2 front teeth. In every picture she was smiling, but with a grandmother's eye, I saw a distant sadness in her clear eyes. I wondered if she still remembered me. Did she ask about the grandma who used to bake cookies and tell her fairy tales? Or had they told her a lie, that I'd moved far away, or worse, that I had passed away? Every time I saw a picture of her, my heart would clench. That was the scar that would never fade. I had won the battle for my dignity, but the price was losing my granddaughter. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if the price was too high, if I should soften, make a call, just to hear her voice. But then my resolve would return. To do that would be to go back, to accept a false peace, to teach Emily the wrong lesson that you can treat people horribly and then just move on as if nothing happened. I couldn't do it. Last month was her 8th birthday. All week, my heart was heavy. I passed a toy store and saw a beautiful dollhouse in the window, exactly the kind she had always dreamed of. I stood there for a long time, my hand clutching the strap of my purse, fighting with myself. Buy it. Send it to them anonymously. It will be a small sign that Grandma still loves you. But in the end, I walked away. A gift couldn't replace a presence. A gift would be seen by Brenda as a weak attempt to crawl back into their lives. I chose my hard-won consistency, even though it broke my heart. Instead, I took the money I would have spent on the dollhouse and used it to fund a small playground at a local center for children in need. I told myself my love for Emily would be spread to other children, children who also needed to be loved. I thought that's how it would be forever, me living my life and them living theirs, 2 parallel lines that would never meet again. Until one Thursday afternoon. I had just gotten home from my pottery class, my hands still faintly dusty with dried clay. When I checked the mail there, among the bills and junk mail, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. There was no return address, only the name of a law firm downtown that I didn't recognize. Curious, I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and slid it open carefully with a letter opener. Inside there were 2 things. The first was a cashier's check. The payee was me, Diane Evans, and the amount made me squint to make sure I was seeing it right. $10,000. The second was a small, folded piece of notepaper, not a formal typed letter. It was a page torn from a notebook, filled with handwritten script. That handwriting, I'd know it anywhere. It was Kevin's. My heart started to beat faster. I carefully unfolded the note. It wasn't a long letter, just a few short lines. Mom, this is the first payment. I know money can't fix anything, but I'm just trying to do the right thing, starting with the small things. My company closed on a project. I'll send $10,000 on the 15th of every month until the debt is paid. It might take a very long time. I just wanted you to know that I'm doing it. I hope you're well. Kevin. That was it. No begging for forgiveness. No excuses. No attempt to justify his actions. Just a simple acknowledgement of the debt and a commitment to repay it. I'm just trying to do the right thing. I read those words again and again. I held the check in my hand, feeling its physical weight. $10,000. That was not a small amount of money. I knew his company was struggling. This must have been a real hardship for him. This wasn't a word. It was an action. For a year, I had been waiting for an apology. But maybe I had been waiting for the wrong thing. Words are easy. Actions are hard. Actions show true change. Kevin wasn't asking me to forgive him. He was trying to become worthy of forgiveness. I sat down in my kitchen chair, the one where I drink my coffee every morning. I looked out the window at Robert's magnolia tree. Its white blossoms were in full bloom, their sweet, pure fragrance filling the air. The door I had slammed shut a year ago was still closed. But for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a tiny crack, a faint sliver of light getting through. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive him. Forgiveness is a long and complicated road, but I knew one thing. The son who wrote this note was not exactly the same man who stood frozen in that restaurant. A seed had just been planted in the silence. Whether or not it would grow, only time would tell. But for the first time in a year, I felt an emotion I thought I might never feel again. A flicker of hope. Not the hope of an easy reconciliation, but the hope that, somewhere deep inside the man who broke my heart, there was still a piece of the son I had raised. The son who knew the difference between right and wrong, and who was trying, however late, to walk toward the light. That $10,000 check sat on my kitchen table for several days. Every morning, when I made my coffee, I'd look at it. It stopped being a shock and became an object of contemplation. It was like a strange stone washed up by the tide onto the familiar shores of my life, forcing me to stop and examine it from all angles. I didn't deposit it right away, nor did I tear it up. I just let it sit there, a tangible reminder of a quiet change happening somewhere out there, beyond my sight. Finally, on a Sunday morning after days of reflection, I did something with it. I took the check, endorsed the back, and deposited it directly into the account for the Magnolia Fund. The money wouldn't be for me, it would be for other women who needed a new start. The act felt profoundly right. It wasn't forgiveness, it was simply transforming a personal act of repentance into a seed of hope for the community. Kevin's debt to me would be paid forward to the world. Perhaps that was the best way to heal. That evening, I took a cup of herbal tea out to my balcony and sat in the old swinging chair Robert had made for me. The New Orleans night settled in, humid and alive with the sound of cicadas. The magnolia tree stood as a dark silhouette, its white flowers like small, glowing candles in the twilight. I sat there for hours, not thinking about Kevin or Brenda, but about myself, about the sick 6-year-old woman sitting here, breathing the night air. I had come such a long, long way from that night in the restaurant. I had fought, I had won, I had found my freedom, but what was the final lesson I had learned? It occurred to me then that the biggest lesson wasn't about how to win a battle, but about how to tend to the garden of your own soul after the storm has passed. The first, and perhaps most important lesson, is that dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you refuse to let them take away. For so many years, I had unknowingly placed my dignity in my son's hands. I measured my self-worth by his attention, by his respect. When he withheld them, I felt worthless. That awful night, as painful as it was the greatest gift. It forced me to stand up and claim my own value, independent of anyone else. Dignity isn't being offered lobster. It's knowing you're worthy of the lobster, even when all you have on the table is a glass of water. The second lesson is that boundless love is a garden without a fence. I had loved Kevin unconditionally, giving without asking for anything in return. I thought that was the noblest virtue of a mother, but I was wrong. A garden without a fence gets trampled. Weeds take over. Love needs healthy boundaries. That boundary is respect. When love crosses the line into disrespect, it stops being love. It becomes entitlement, and it allows for contempt. My closing the door wasn't an act of unlove. It was the act of building a necessary fence to protect the garden of my soul, to give it a chance to heal and grow again. Sometimes, the most fiercely loving thing you can do is to say, no. And the third lesson, one I am still learning every day, is that forgiveness is not an event, it's a process, and it might not be for everyone. People talk about forgiving others to set yourself free. But I've realized that premature forgiveness granted without true repentance, isn't freedom. It's a denial of your own pain, an invitation for others to continue hurting you. Kevin's check wasn't an apology that wiped the slate clean, it was just a single brick. A very small brick on a very long road to rebuilding trust. Maybe one day, that road will be complete. Or maybe it won't, and that's okay. My peace no longer depends on whether he finishes that journey. My peace comes from knowing that I have chosen the right path for myself. I looked at the magnolia tree. Its roots ran deep into the earth, strong and resilient. It had stood there through so many hurricanes, so many droughts. It didn't reach for the sky to impress it. It reached deep into the ground for its sustenance. And I realized that was me. The years of hard work, the lonely nights, the quiet sacrifices, they weren't weaknesses. They weren't common habits to be ashamed of. They were my roots. They were what gave me my strength, my resilience, my ability to stand firm when the storm hit. The Harrisons, with their glittering, superficial lives, they were like hothouse flowers. Beautiful, but shallow-rooted. A strong wind could knock them right over. I used to be ashamed of my roots, but now I cherish them more than anything. They are my source. They are my strength. They are the true legacy I will leave behind. Not a chain of fancy restaurants, but the lesson of the resilience that comes from roots that run deep. I finished my tea, the gentle taste of chamomile and mint lingering. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if one day I'll be able to sit at a table with Kevin and Emily, not in a fancy restaurant, but maybe right here at my small kitchen table, sharing a pie I baked with my own hands. But that's no longer my ultimate goal. My goal now is much simpler. It's to keep tending my garden, to prune the withered leaves of resentment, to plant new seeds of compassion, and every single day, to take a moment to sit in the shade of my magnolia tree, breathe in its sweet fragrance, and be grateful for the roots that hold me steady. Because in the end, a truly full life isn't one without storms. It's one where, after every storm, you find that your garden, however battered, still has strong roots, ready for a new season of blossoms. And you know, with absolute certainty, that you have all the strength you need to grow it all back again. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it, and follow us for more. I'd love to read your thoughts or even your own stories in the comments. Let's keep the empathy and sharing going. It truly means the world.